So hi everyone, welcome to another session, another day with OWASP Jakarta. And we have today our webinar session. And if you are somebody who is actually searching for something on network and attacker, so you're at the very right place. So we have the very amazing Sam with us. He is the OWASP chapter lead for London. And today we'll be talking about the OWASP Nettacker. Like I cannot say it together, but I hope we learn to say the network and attacker part together for the reconciliation and the vulnerability scanning. So we all welcome you, Sam, here, and over to you.
Hi, everyone, and thanks very much for having me today. So let me just share my screen. Okay, give me a second. Right, I hope you can see my slides now.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Sam Stepanyan, OWASP London Chapter Leader. You can also find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is SecureStep9. I tweet about some interesting news and things I find in cybersecurity and application security. So if you're on Twitter, I invite you to follow me. If you're not on Twitter, I invite you to join Twitter because this is the most important social media network for cybersecurity professionals. Everyone's in there on it already, including the good guys and all the bad guys, and that's what makes it interesting. Today, I'm going to talk about OWASP Nettacker Project and how to use it for recon and vulnerability scanning. A little bit more about me. As I already said, I'm an OWASP London Chapter Leader. I also chair something called OWASP Chapter Committee, which is a committee at OWASP which helps chapters all around the world, including yours, to be healthy, active, make sure you have speakers, you have sponsors, and you have all the resources to help you operate. I'm an ex-developer myself. I come from software development background, and I'm an application security consultant working in financial services in London, in the City of London. So I help many banks, investment funds, and pension companies, financial services organization to protect their applications. So I'm an application security guy and I'm a defender. So why am I presenting a talk here about a tool which consists of words network and attacker when I'm an application guy and I'm a defender? So let me tell you about my story with NETTACKER. It started in 2017. So I first tried NETTACKER in 2017. I saw it appearing on the list of OWASP projects. I ran it. I saw a whole bunch of options being displayed when I downloaded and ran the tool. I didn't understand what it was doing, so I decided not to look at it and I just forgot about it. However, later in 2018, suddenly I received an email message from the OWASP Nettacker leaders, and I said, guys, OWASP London chapter leaders, there is a Black Hat Europe conference happening in London, and we are supposed to be presenting NETTACKER, but we are unable to get there. Can you please go to Black Hat and present this project instead of us? And we said, okay, yeah, we are OWASP chapter leaders. We are always happy to help other OWASP projects. So myself and Dr. Greg Frakos, my chapter co-leader, we had to learn this tool overnight. So we used a Zoom session just like this one, and we looked at the demo. And we said, oh my God, this is such an amazing tool. We absolutely loved it. And we went to Black Hat Europe in London and we presented it. And then something amazing happened. This happened. There are lots of people coming to our booth, watching the demo. Lots of penetration testing people, security consultants, security engineers, some senior people. Everybody came to see this tool. They were all fascinated. We said, okay, people love this. So I actually became a co-leader of OWASP Nettacker Project. I absolutely love this tool. So in 2019, we decided to do it again, and even bigger crowds gathered to watch the tool. Fortunately, in 2020, there was no in-person conference, of course, because of the pandemic, because everyone shifted onto the virtual world. So what is OWASP Nettacker and why everybody loves this tool so much, why everyone likes it? And it is quite a unique project for OWASP because it's probably one of the first projects which is specifically targeting penetration testing, because it's a tool which helps with penetration testing because it automates information gathering and vulnerability scanning tasks. It is written in Python, which is very important because it runs on almost anything which runs Python. So you can run it on Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. And I even managed to run it on Raspberry Pi. So this tool is, because being written in Python, has a great advantage. Another important thing to mention about OWASP Nettacker is that it was actually enhanced by students participating in something called Google Summer of Code. If you don't know what Google Summer of Code is, it is an initiative by Google which runs every year, and that's an initiative for students. So essentially, it's a paid internship for students where Google invites students from all over the world to apply to work on an open source project of their choice during their summer vacation, during their summer break. And students need to apply. They need to write an application form and basically tell Google why they would like to work on this particular project. And then if they are selected, then they start working on this project. And we're very, very lucky because OWASP Nettacker was actually enhanced by students. So if you are a student, or if you know someone who is a student and who you think can benefit from a paid internship by Google, definitely do check out Google Summer of Code program for next year. This year, it's already coming to its completion in August because obviously it's almost the end of summer. But next year, definitely make sure that if you are a student yourself, or you know someone who is a student, they apply, and obviously they have a chance to work on any open source project, not necessarily OWASP project. OWASP participates in Google Summer of Code, but there are many other companies, for example, like Mozilla and Linux Foundation, which participate in this initiative. So what is OWASP Nettacker? You can think of OWASP Nettacker as a Swiss Army knife kind of tool. Just like Swiss Army knife, it's a tool consisting of many tools, which are not necessarily compatible with each other, but can they all be used together? So OWASP Nettacker is a collection of tools. It has a modular structure. You can create your own modules if you know how to code in Python. It's a fast-performing tool as it uses Python multi-threading. Another cool thing is that it has customizable profiles. So it's like bundles of modules focused on a specific task. So imagine if you need to pull several blades out of Swiss Army knife to complete a task. That's what these profiles allow you to do, to run several modules together. And of course, the important thing is that you can automate it and you can run it from the command line. But what is also important to say about OWASP Nettacker is that it is actually a young project, so it's not officially released yet. It's not even in beta. We're currently in version 0.02, and there are people currently working on the next version, 0.03. So just like any open source project, always looking for more contributors. However, what is cool about Nettacker? It has a command line interface, it has a web UI, it has an API, and it has a report generator, which is one of the coolest things in it. If you are using Kali Linux and you know what Maltego is, which is a great research tool, Nettacker actually has Maltego transforms, and it has over 70 modules, so 70 different Swiss Army knife blades that you can pull out and use for your penetration testing, for your bug bounty, or just to scan your network. So how do you get Nettacker? OWASP Nettacker has a page on the official owasp.org. It is under owasp.org/www project Nettacker. You can see it here. And the documentation is actually located on the wiki. So unlike some GitHub projects, we use the wiki feature of GitHub. So this is where all the documentation is. And you will also find on the wiki the installation instructions. So you can see the arrowhead points towards the installation. I will talk about installation in a minute, but first of all, for everyone listening to understand the difference between Nettacker and other scanners, like for example, a Burp Suite or OWASP Zap that many other security people might already be familiar with. So other scanners like Burp or OWASP Zap, they are designed to scan just one website, and they scan it for many web application vulnerabilities. Whatever that scanner is able to find, so essentially both these tools, they crawl one website to discover all the URLs, all the parameters, all the forms, all the buttons, and it finds all the vulnerabilities on that website. OWASP Nettacker is different. It scans one or many, and that could be hundreds or thousands of IP addresses, networks of subdomains, and it scans them for open ports and also one or more specific vulnerabilities which are listed by the user, and they bundled in modules. So that is the great difference between NETTACKER and other scanners, because NETTACKER allows you to scan the whole network. So it is kind of similar to Nmap, but it has advantage, and I will tell you about the great advantage of NETTACKER versus Nmap that many people might be familiar with. So first of all, how do you install it? To install NETTACKER, you need to install the dependencies first. So please do read the manual, which is located on our wiki. Because there are several operating system dependencies that you need to install first. For example, things like SSL libraries, which need to be installed. Also, if you are planning to use Postgres database, you need to install like Postgres libraries and some of the curl libraries as well. So you need to make sure that you install this first, and so make sure you read the documentation. And then to install it, you need to use a standard git clone command. So you can just git clone it from OWASP GitHub like this, using github.com/OWASP/NETTACKER. Then you can just change directory to NETTACKER, and you run the Python's pip install command with requirements.txt. So this is a pretty much standard thing for any Python software. If you're not familiar with Python or just don't want to install any dependencies or having any issues installing dependencies on your operating system, there you can use Docker version. So there is no official OWASP image yet. So you can use mine temporarily. You can just do a Docker pull secure step 9 OWASP Nettacker. However, the best thing to do is actually compose your own image. So you can just git clone it from GitHub and then just use Docker compose up command to start your own version of Nettacker inside a Docker container. So important thing about NETTACKER before you start using it is the responsible use warning, because OWASP NETTACKER is an offensive security tool, and just like any offensive security tools, you should not misuse it, nor any other security tool for unauthorized access. And just a reminder to everyone that performing security scans without permission from the owner of the computer system is illegal, so make sure that you always obtain permission. In this talk, I will be doing a demo, and I will be demoing the tool on two websites, on OWASP.org, which has bug bounty policy, and I'm allowed to scan it. And I will also show you some examples of modules on Uber. Again, Uber is participating in bug bounty, and it's actually allowing security researchers to scan their subdomains for security vulnerabilities with specific caveats. So it is very important to make sure that you have the permission before you start using the tool. So remember at the beginning of the talk, I showed you that when I first launched NETTACKER, I couldn't understand at all how it works and what it does, okay? So let me break it down for you. It is very, very simple, actually. NETTACKER has lots of modules, and there are modules of 3 different types. It has a module of type scan, for example, port scan, which is similar to Nmap. It has a module of type vuln, for example, Apache Struts vuln, which looks for Apache Struts vulnerability. And it has modules of type brute. So that is for brute forcing. For example, SSH brute module will attempt to brute force user accounts using SSH protocol. So I'm going to show you some of the NETTACKER scan modules. There are currently over 20 modules. You can see there are lots of them. I put an asterisk next to some of them to provide you with some explanations. So for example, admin scan will be looking for any folders on the target which have any admin control panels. CMS detection scan will do a detection of the content management system, whether your target is running WordPress, Joomla, or Drupal. Another useful one is directory scan, dir scan. This is similar to directory buster tool, for example. So this allows you to find specifically named subdirectories on the target. ICMP scan allows you to basically do the ICMP or ping scan of the whole network, find out which hosts are responding and how quickly. Another very useful module that I use is PMA scan. So PMA is PHP My Admin. So PHP My Admin is a tool to manage MySQL database, and that tool is installed on hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of websites and servers, and many people just install it and they keep it in this local configuration and they forget about it. And by default, hackers can use it to break into your system. That's why it's so important. Port scanner is, of course, the standard port scan. Another cool module that NETTACKER has is subdomain scan. I'm going to show it to you. It basically allows you to discover all the subdomains of the target domain. Another great one is WAPalizer. WAPalizer is a tool which allows you to discover what is running on the target, what kind of programming languages, what kind of frameworks, and what kind of operating system. So it is a very useful module. WordPress version scan allows you to discover a particular version of WordPress. And there are a few other interesting WordPress plugins. I will cover some of them. For example, there's a module which allows you to scan for WordPress plugins, and it has a list of the plugins which had known vulnerabilities. And there's another interesting module which allows you to enumerate users on your WordPress installation. So that's just the scanning module. Then we have lots of vulnerability scanning modules. So you can see there are lots of vulnerability scanning modules here. We're adding them all the time. But some interesting ones that I want to bring your attention to is, for example, the Citrix CV one, because when Citrix had a big vulnerability at the beginning of 2020, there were again hundreds, if not thousands, of very large organizations affected by this vulnerability, and people just didn't know to scan if they are affected or not. And OWASP Nettacker was one of the first tools, which was free and open source, and we released a module allowing any network administrator to scan for this vulnerability. Another few interesting ones I'm going to be showing you today is server version vuln. So server version vuln basically shows if the target server is leaking a header called server, and that will basically shows usually the what the target is running. And there's another related one which is X powered by. So X powered by is another popular header that a lot of web servers set, and that usually indicates which technology your target is using, whether it's running PHP with a specific version or a specific version of ASP.NET. And again, that gives attackers a lot of information about what is running on the target, and they will then be able to find a specific exploit to target. That's why this is quite useful. And another very useful module that I use a lot, and I think it's very, very useful for both internal and external use, it's SSL certificate expired vuln. So this module allows you to scan your target and find out if it runs any service with expired SSL certificates. Again, why is this useful? This is useful because if there is a server on your network or on somebody else's network with SSL certificate expired and it's still running, that indicates what? That indicates that the server is most likely abandoned by the IT team, because, well, if they don't renew the SSL certificate, maybe they don't patch it as well. And if they forget to renew SSL certificate, they forget to patch it, that means that server might be vulnerable to attacks. So that is why this is quite an important vulnerability scanning module. And this is the list of all the brute forcing modules. So NetTacker can brute force using several protocols. So it can brute force FTP accounts. It can brute force using HTTP basic auth. It can brute force using HTTP form, which is probably the most popular thing that people use, like just a form with username and password on their website. It can also brute force using HTTP NTLM module. Also can brute force SMTP protocol and SSH, which is another very popular brute forcing module. Also Telnet, or WordPress XML RPC brute forcing as well. So if your target is running WordPress, you can also try to brute force user accounts using it. So another interesting thing about NetTacker is that it was originally called IoT scan for scanning Internet of Things. It is still the Twitter handle for NetTacker. And the original idea when the people who created it was so you could scan your network for IoT devices and then scan the IoT device for open ports, and then try to brute force scan for default credentials like admin. And I've actually recently run NETTACKER on a client which was running lots of IoT devices. They had CCTV cameras, so they had about 200 cameras all around the world, and they had no idea how secure those cameras were. So I actually used NETTACKER to scan all the cameras, all the network containing these web cameras, and I found lots of them which were using the default credentials of admin. And I think it was absolutely fascinating. People said they couldn't basically do it with any other tool, and NETTACKER is absolutely free and open source. So the most popular module in NETTACKER is probably Port Scanner. So again, this is similar to Nmap. However, I think it's much easier to use and can be faster compared with Nmap because you can control the number of threads and how many threads per host you want to use. So because it's using Python multi-threading, basically it depends on how much memory you have on your server, you can and how many threads your operating system supports. You can basically use that to the full potential to run the scan. You can also, well, by default, a NETTACKER port scan will scan for 1,000 most popular ports, so which is very similar to the way how Nmap works. But you can also add this -g parameter and list specific ports to scan, and you can just list them using the comma separated format, or you can use a dash if you want to scan port range. So now let's talk about the way, how do you run NETTACKER? Remember when I've run NETTACKER first, I just didn't understand how to use this because I didn't know that NETTACKER actually requires 2 parameters in order to run it, because it requires a target, what are you going to scan, and it requires a method or a module, what are you going to scan your target with. So you need to define the -i parameter and -m for your module or your method. Now, here's an example of how would you use this for a port scan. For example, if you want to scan this IP address with NETTACKER, you would specify -i and then the IP address of your target, and then -m and then the name of your module, in this case, port scan. You can also use NETTACKER to scan your entire network. So if you want to scan /24 or 256 IP addresses in one go, you can just define it like this. And actually, there are more formats for the NETTACKER targets. You can use a single IP address like this, 192.168.1.1, for example. You can use a range of IP addresses. So you can define a start IP address and the end IP address, and all the IP addresses in this range will be scanned. You can also scan your network using the CIDR/bits notation, which a lot of people are familiar with, like this. You can also scan the whole domain name, for example, owasp.org. You can also scan a specific target URL, and that URL can be defined using the HTTP or HTTPS protocol. So that will scan just one site. And again, remember when I was comparing NETTACKER with other scanners like ZAP or Burp, right? So basically those scanners, they would usually scan one target. But of course, NETTACKER, as you can see, can attack the whole network and actually can attack even more networks, because if you want to define multiple targets, because if you're a large organization, usually you would have several domain names and you would have several networks. And it could be, if you're a large global company, you might have your networks all around the world, right? All interconnected, but you can still scan them with NETTACKER. How? All you need to do is you need to create a text file containing your list of targets, and you just put one target per line. And then instead of using -i to specify the target, you use -l, and then you specify the file name here. That's it. And just a simple text file with one target per line. And then you define your method here. And again, or you can use profiles to scan your targets. Another cool thing about NETTACKER is that you can chain different methods. So you can run them together, right? You can pull several Swiss Army knife blades at the same time. And all you need to do is, if you want to define several modules in NETTACKER, you just list them with a comma. So you say NETTACKER-I your target, and then -M, and then module 1, module 2, etc. So for example, if you want to perform on your target 192.168.149 a port scan and phpMyAdmin scan at the same time, you can just define 2 modules. That's it, and NETTACKER will actually run them both. And for example, if you want to scan OWASP.org and perform a subdomain scan and then find out the server version vulnerabilities, you can also just chain these modules together. So another cool thing about NETTACKER is you can have profiles. So profiles is basically bundles of methods to be used together on a target. So NETTACKER comes with several profiles already. So it has a profile called info. So this is all the modules for information gathering used together. It has a profile called scan, which is all the scanning modules. It has a profile called brute, which basically will run all the brute forcing modules on your target. Vuln will run all the vulnerability scanning modules on your target. WT for WordPress will run all the WordPress modules on the target. Joomla will use all the Joomla modules on your target. And you can use a special profile all, which will basically run absolutely all modules that NETTACKER has on your target, but of course that will take a while. So let me now switch to my Kali Linux, and I'm going to show you a demo of NETTACKER. All right, here is my Kali Linux running here. I have version 2021.1 here. I already have NETTACKER installed here in my NETTACKER folder, so I'm not going to show you how to install it. So here's my folder here. If I list the contents of the folder, you can see that there's some Python files here, but of course the most important file here is nettacker.py. NETTACKER runs on both Python 2 and Python 3. So for example, if I run it with Python 2, it will still run. You can see there's a warning coming up here. Let me scroll up so you can see that just as I said, when I first ran NETTACKER, it displays a lot of options, right? And I didn't understand them at the beginning, but you can see that you get the warning that the Python 2 is no longer supported and will be discontinued. But you can also run NETTACKER on Python 3 because it is compatible with both Python 2 and Python 3. And again, you see the error here comes up with cannot specify the targets. So if you remember, we need to define a target, right? So how do we do it? So let's run NETTACKER. So I will do I will show in this example how to do a port scan. So I have to do Python 3 nettacker.py, and I need to provide 2 parameters, right, as we discussed. So -I is for the target. So let me define my target, 192.168.132.176. So I have a VM here, which has some ports open, and I want to find out what ports are running. So I'm going to run a port scanning module on this target, right? So you can see when you start NETTACKER, it displays its version and it tells you how many modules are loaded and what is the target. And there you go, you see it's now finished its scan. And you can see these are the all open ports which were open on this particular target. When performing the scan, you can see that the results are displayed in this tabular format, and you would see the host, which would be an IP address or a domain name, username and password. These columns are used for brute forcing modules. So if you used any brute force modules and NETTACKER found a combination of username and password which allowed NETTACKER to log in, they will be displayed as a port number. The type is the type of the scan or the name of the module. And this is a description. Description is usually a description of the vulnerability. For port scan, it actually shows you the type of the port. So for example, here you can see that on port 23, it found the telnet. On port 22, it found something which is SSH. On port 111, it found the SUN RPC. But here's an interesting one. On port 8082, it found something which is running an HTTP server. And then it found something on port 55555, and it couldn't determine what the service was. So it just said, well, I could connect to it using TCP. So that is how you would run a NETTACKER just generally. But let me show you something else. So you can also use the port scan. Let me show it to you on OWASP.org. Again, a reminder that I'm allowed to scan OWASP.org. So on OWASP.org, I want to, when you're using a domain name, the first thing that I probably want to discover is how many subdomains this domain has. So I'm going to use a subdomain scan module. Okay, so what this module does, it performs a subdomain recon. So it's going to go and find out all the subdomains of OWASP.org using various sources that you can find. You can see how quickly it went and discovered all the subdomains of OWASP. And again, you can see we got them in the same format. But that is not all, because what is actually really cool about NETTACKER, because the other tools, they can go and discover subdomains, right? Tools like Subfinder. We can combine the subdomain with other modules. And this is how you can do it. For example, I want to use NETTACKER to perform a port scan on every single subdomain of OWASP.org and find out if the particular ports are open. I want to find out if there's a port 80 or port 443 open on OWASP.org. And I can, well, let me run it first just on OWASP.org. So it will do it only on one host, because obviously there is a host responding to OWASP.org. So it found it just on the main host. However, the great thing about NETTACKER, that you can run any module on all the subdomains of your target. So to do this, so if I add -s parameter, that tells NETTACKER to run whatever modules we have here for all subdomains of the target, which is absolutely fantastic. So when I press enter now and start running NETTACKER, it's going to, first of all, go and discover all the subdomains of OWASP.org, and then it's going to port scan them for ports 80 and 443 and find out if these two ports are actually open. And you can see that it is running now. So it's now first going and it is discovering all the subdomains. And you can see it is now discovering the ones which have ports 80 and 443 open. Right, and we can actually speed this up as well, because we can define more threads and more scanning threads per host as well. But you can see this is why it is so great. And so doing it with other tools is not that easy, because you have to chain many tools. And with OWASP Nettacker, it was just one simple command line to run this. Okay, and you can see there's quite a lot. So there you go. This is the picture of all our port scan of all the subdomains of OWASP, which is absolutely fantastic. But that is not all. Let's say, okay, I can see the ports 80 and 443 are open, but I want to know what is running on this port 80 and 443. Do any of these web servers actually leak the server version header or the X-powered by header? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add more modules. So I want to add server version vuln and X-powered by vuln. Okay, so that means we're going to run 3 modules: a port scanner, a server version vulnerability scanner, which will check what is inside the server header and what is inside X-powered by header. And we also, there will be a port scan performed for ports 80 and 443 to check if they're open. And this will be done -s mid subdomain for all subdomains of OWASP.org. Okay, so let me now run this command. So this is an interesting combination. So we're running 3 modules and we're running it again on all the subdomains. And you can see straight away, we are seeing that some of the OWASP subdomains are vulnerable to the disclosure of X-powered by. And you can see some of them are running Cloudflare, some run Nginx, some run RiskSense. There are a couple of them running Atlassian, right? And some of them do not disclose what they're running. For example, like training.owas.org, there's nothing about it. But you can see some others, they do show the disclosure, which is absolutely great. So we're now running 3 modules on all subdomains of our target. And you will see when the scan is finished, all these results will be placed in this tabular format. Okay, but that is not all, because this on the screen you can say, okay, what is this? This is just the screen output in the text format. But what is great about NETTACKER is that it has reports, and you can see after it's finished, it says report is saved in this HTML file and database. So database is very important. I will get back to it a little bit later, because every single scan you run with NETTACKER is actually stored in a database, and a database is searchable. So by default, NETTACKER uses SQLite database, but you can also instruct it to use other databases, and I'll show you a slide about this a little bit later. But let's have a look at this HTML file. Okay, so I'm going to use Firefox, which I have installed on Kali Linux, to take a look at this report. So let me launch the web browser inside Kali. That is Firefox. Okay, and I'm going to paste the location of the report file. Okay, let's see what we have here. So here we have the OWASP Nettacker greatest feature, penetration testing graphs. So this is a very, very cool feature. You can see the attack started by NETTACKER, and you can see all the targets that NETTACKER was reaching, and you can see all the subdomains of OWASP.org. So for example, you can see for lightning OWASP.org, there was a port scan, a server version vuln, and X powered by vuln, and they all returned some results. So you can see that ports 443 and 80 were open. The server version vulnerability was Cloudflare, and the X powered by return risk sense here. Okay, but for example, if you go and take a look at this name vert host OWASP.org, you can see that the actual results are different. You can see that there is Atlassian proxy here, which is quite interesting. And for example, you do not see X powered by. So see, for example, OCMS. So for example, this one, you can see there are 3 different branches after the subdomain, because all these 3 modules return results. But for this particular host, for OCMS OWASP.org, only 2 modules return results, right? So, and you can see which ones. So this is very, very cool. And you can zoom in and zoom out, and you can see this NETTACKER graph, the penetration testing graph, and it instantly gives you a lot of information about the target that you are scanning. This is a very, very cool and very powerful feature. And again, for a free and open source software, I think this is absolutely amazing. But that is not all, because at the bottom of this report, you see the same report you saw in text. You saw it in a nice HTML table. And you can see the same column. So you can see the host, the username and password here is blank because there was no brute forcing performed. But you can see the port number, and you can see the type of the module, and you can see the description and the time of the scan. There's also a cool visual effects feature. So if I want to focus your attention on something specifically, I can just hover over this row, for example, this OCMS, and there you go. You can see that all other rows are now blurred, because I want to show you that this particular host I discovered was running Atlassian proxy, while everybody else was running something else. So this is a very, very cool feature. And that HTML report is saved by default every time when you run NETTACKER with a graph. Okay, so let me now switch back to my presentation so I can talk about this a little bit more in detail. So first of all, one thing I'm not going to cover, but you need to know that it exists. There is something called the wizard mode, and you can call the wizard using -w command. And the -w really just basically asks you all the questions, like please enter the targets, how many threads you want, how many threads per host, where do you want to save it, and if you want to run it in a wizard mode, an interactive mode, you can define -w. Okay, so as I already showed you the live demo here, so you've seen the graph, which is a very, very cool feature. There are actually several types of graphs that you can use, and you can switch between them. So there's a D3 tree graph, version 1 and version 2, but there's also a circle graph, which basically, instead of displaying a tree, displays everything in circles. Again, that might be quite useful if you, for some modules, if you want to see just like a star-like graph showing you all the discovered vulnerabilities in circles. But that is not all, because by default, of course, the report is an HTML, but the greatest advantage of NETTACKER is that you can actually ask it to display results in other formats. And NETTACKER can also produce report in JSON format and in CSV format. So why is JSON useful? JSON is useful because, of course, it's a structured format. That means you can chain NETTACKER with other tools, any other security tools, and they will be able to understand and consume it. And of course, the greatest thing about CSV file format is that it is a spreadsheet. Of course, one of the coolest thing about this, it is essentially a manager's dream, because what you can do, you can take this free tool, run it on your network, and you get a spreadsheet of all your assets, all your open ports, and all the vulnerabilities on your network. So I don't know any other free and open source tool which actually does that. So yes, you get a spreadsheet. So try doing that with any other tool, like for example, Nmap. You get an XML file, but you don't get a spreadsheet. So let me actually show you how to do this. This is a very cool feature, which I think deserves a live demo. So hang on, let me switch to my Kali Linux again. Okay, so I'm going to repeat the same scan that I've just done, but I want to generate report in a different format. So to generate a report in a different format, I have to use the -o parameter. So O stands for output. And if I say, okay, I need to name my report, I can call it a report OWASP, for example. And here, after the file extension, if I define a txt, NETTACKER will generate the text file, which will look like this, right? Like this. Okay. If I define .html, it will generate HTML file that we've seen already. If I define JSON, it will generate the format JSON formatted file. But the coolest thing is I want to generate it in CSV. So now I'm running the same thing, and it's going now to do exactly the same scan. So it's going to use all these three modules: the port scan, the server version one, and X powered by, and we'll perform a port scan on ports 80 and 443. But you can see here it says you cannot use graph feature, because to use the graph, you have to use HTML, right? But we don't want the graph. We want a spreadsheet. So let's see how it works. So let's scan our organization, in this case, OWASP.org, for all the subdomains and all the open ports 80 and 443, and any X powered by or server banners that it might have. Now you can see the scan is now running. And the difference now between this and the previous scan is that it is going to produce a CSV file. You can see it says report is saved in report-OWASP CSV and the database. So I'll talk about the database a little bit later. So I want to take a look at the CSV. So I have LibreOffice installed in my Kali Linux, and I want to use the calc feature inside the LibreOffice, which is basically like Excel. It's a tool to look at the spreadsheets. And I said, okay, can you open this report OWASP.csv file, please? You can see it is running now. And of course, because it needs to import it CSV file, I said, yeah, we'll accept the default. And there you go. We have a spreadsheet, which is a manager's dream with all the assets of our organization, OWASP.org. You can see that spreadsheet has one extra column, which is the unique scan ID. Again, this is the unique scan ID used to identify particular scan. In this case, it's useless for us. I'm going to delete this, but it might be important if you are integrating NETTACKER with other tools. Again, we did not do any brute forcing. So again, the username and password are not important. The time of the scan, well, I can leave it or I can delete it, right? Of course, it shows it in a different format, time zone. But that is what's important. So this is all the results that we managed to obtain using the information gathering on OWASP.org as an organization. And because this is a spreadsheet, of course, the great thing about this, that it can be filtered. So now, for example, I can just use the spreadsheet as a spreadsheet. That's it. The job of the scanner is done. But if I want to go and find out if I have anything running Nginx, for example, on my network, All right, I can just go and say, okay, show me everything which has Nginx, and there you go. Straight away, I can see that OWASP had secure flag host, and it had ports 80 and port 443 open, and it was running Nginx. Right? It's very simple as filtering. If I want to find out what was running Atlassian proxy, again, I can just tick that, and I can see that was contact.owas.org and ocms.owas.org. Again, I can see that these ports were open. And similarly, because this is a standard spreadsheet, if I want to go and see everything which had port 80 open, I can just filter by everything which had port 80 open and whatever was discovered there. So this is why it is so useful. And of course, another thing that I want to show you, of course, that you can do with a spreadsheet data is filter. If I want to find out all the hosts were actually leaking their what they're running using the X powered by vulnerability, because this is basically the modules. So there were 3 modules which were run on the network using the scan. You can see everything which was using the X powered by. You can see all these hosts and all the ports that they were running. So why is this so important? And I think this is great for OWASP Nettacker because it solves a very important issue. There was this tweet in 2017 by Jeremiah Grossman, who is a very famous guy in application security. He's a founder of White Hat and a guy who contributed to OWASP a lot. It's one of our application security legends. But back in 2017, when we were working on OWASP Top 10, Jeremiah tweeted this, and he said, I suggest that the OWASP Top 10 2017 includes A0 or asset inventory. These days, the biggest AppSec risk are websites you don't know you own. What did he mean by that? He meant if you don't know what you own, you cannot possibly secure it. And OWASP Nettacker actually solves this problem for you for free. So you can take this tool and you can take it back into your organization. You can scan your network from inside and from outside, and you can find out exactly what you run, and you will get it in a nice spreadsheet format. Well, or you can look at it in a nice penetration testing graph format. But that is a very, very important thing. And now OWASP has a tool, which is great. Another thing I want to show you in Nettacker is API and web UI. So Nettacker has a web interface, and to use it, you need to start it with a start API parameter. That's all you need to start it. By default, Nettacker will run on port 5000, but you can change this. So you can define on which host it's listening, on which ports it's running, and you can define the whitelist for the IP addresses which are going to connect to it. But basically, this is how you run it. I'll show it to you live in a second. If you run Nettacker with a start --start API, when it starts up, it will tell you a few things. It will show you the most important thing here, which is the API key. It's randomly generated API key that you need to grab. It will tell you that it's running Flask engine, so it's using Python's Flask web engine. It gives you a warning, do not use it in production because it's, of course, Flask is a development grade server rather than used for the big production. But by default, it will run on port 127.0.0.1. And here, I think in the screenshot, it shows running on port 0.0.0.0. So basically it listens on everything. But again, you can change this using parameters. The actual web UI looks like this when you start it. Okay, and I'm going to show it to you live rather than showing you on slides. Let's see if this works. I'm going to switch to my Kali Linux where my Nettacker is running. Okay. So of course, you have to scan this on the command line, how to use Nettacker for the scans in the command line. Now let's see how we can do it using the API and web UI. So how do we start Nettacker in web UI mode? I just say Python 3 Nettacker, and then I just provide --start -API. That's it. So what's going to happen now? OWASP Nettacker gave me an API key. I'm going to copy it. It's very important because this is how I will log in. And it says it's running on HTTPS 127.0.0.1 port 5000. Okay, great. So let's connect to it. Again, in my Kali Linux, I launch my web browser, which is Firefox. and I'm going to navigate to https://127.001.5000. Okay, the first thing, of course, I'm going to get a prompt about security risks, because this is a site running HTTPS with a self-signed certificate. But of course, if you run it in your environment and you issue an SSL certificate, which is valid, you can load it as well. So inside Firefox, I'm just going to click on Advanced and say, yes, I want to accept risk and continue. And what we'll do is this will load the OWASP Nettacker web UI. And this is what it looks like. Okay, so we get several buttons. We have tutorial, crawler, results, new scan, and there is a button here to set session and something to say enter your API key. So if I don't put an API key and I try to say, oh, I want to do a new scan, Nettacker web UI will say, no, you need to log in first. You can't do anything without the API key. So I'm going to paste my API key, which I copied from command line, and click on set session and say, success, your session is updated. So what we can do now is I can show you one of the coolest thing here. You can start your new scan here and you have a web UI. Look, so you don't have to deal with command line interface. And similarly, let's run a similar scan, which I did in command line on the web. So let's say I want to scan OWASP.org. So here you go, that's my target. These are all the profiles that I can use that I talked about. So you can see they are color coded inside web UI. So for example, if I want to use all the vulnerability modules, I just stick vulnerability, so it's red, and all the vul modules, they light up. If I want to use all the scan modules, the green ones, all the scan modules light up. And if I want to use the brute forcing modules, all the brute forcing modules light up. Or I can just pick and choose, which is very cool. So for example, I can go and say, I want to use a server version vulnerability, and I want to use X powered by vulnerability, and just place a tick box here. And I want to use a D3v2 graph. We can also switch the language. So you can see there are multiple languages available here. And again, there is an Indonesian one, which I don't speak, but I'll try. I don't know whether it'll work or not, but you can try it. And by the way, please report if it's wrong, because I think it's quite important to make sure that we get the right translation. This is the output, but you can go it here. And there are also some parameters that I want to set on the scan. You can see there's an advanced tab here. So of course I can start the scan right now, but I want to perform the scan on OWASP.org for all subdomains. And there is no subdomain tick box here. It is actually in advanced tab. So I'm going to just click on my advanced tab, and that's where it is. This is, you can see the check subdomains. This is the tick box that I want. And as you can see, the engine options are here as well. So you can see how many threads, how many thread numbers per host, how many retries, if there's a failure, the time to sleep between the different retries, verbose level. If we were doing a port scan, you can define a particular port numbers here. Again, you can define a range or do a comma separated list of ports. NETTACKER supports working through a SOX proxy, which is again very interesting. You can actually scan through a proxy. And if you have a SOX files proxy, you can just define its IP address and port number. If you are performing a brute forcing attack, this is where you can define your username and passwords that you want to try. And also all the modules, they have something called extra module options. There are lots and lots of them. The interface for them is currently not particularly good. There are lots of them, lots of stuff that you can define, and you can see them here. Yeah, for example, one of the modules I want to show you is which passwords are going to be used by default if you try to do SSH brute force. You can see these are all the various passwords that the attacker will try to use if you want to perform an SSH brute forcing. Okay, so let's now see if we can scan this, start the scan. All right, I think my VM is a little bit misbehaving. Let me see if I can switch to the PowerPoint quickly and just show this. Okay, yeah, that seems to be working. Let me switch back to my Kali Linux. Yeah, okay. So you can see when I click on submit button, it says success, request submitted. And what happens, you can see this information is formatted in JSON because this is actually using the API of NETTACKER. And now the scan is actually going to be performed. And what you can do, you can actually look at the results of the scan using this results button. And because NETTACKER has a database, all the previous scans are actually stored in the database. So here is the information about all the previous scans. So you can see I've done 29 scans with my NETTACKER here in this version of Kali. This is the last one that I've just run. It tells us the date and time when it was run, right? This is Pacific time. So that's why it actually shows that it's early morning. It shows us the scan ID. Remember the one that I showed you before, where the report file name went. Events number 70, that means that the result will contain 70 rows, right, in the table. What were the port numbers, what the category was used, what the scan methods were used. So we use server version vuln and X powered by vuln, right? And the important thing that I want to show you is not just the language, but scan command. You see it says through the OWASP Nettacker API. And for example, if you look at the previous scan that I've done here, one of the previous ones here, you can see that the scan command was the nettacker.py. So this was command line run. But this one, we just did using this web API. So if I just click on it, you will see the same penetration testing graph that I showed you before, showing all the scans that NETTACKER performed. And you can see all the subdomains of OWASP.org that it discovered and the results of server version vuln and X powered by vuln that it discovered on every single one of them. And again, if we scroll down, we can see them in this tabular format, which is very, very nice. But this is not all, because what you can also do, because this is a database, right? You can see this is the whole history is here. You can also, for example, take the same result that I used here, which was in HTML, but I want to download it as CSV or as JSON. So there are two buttons here, get JSON or get CSV. So if I click on get CSV, it's going to say, okay, I'm going to download a CSV file and say, yep, please go and download it. Here's my CSV. And I say, yeah, I want to open that CSV file and I want to look at it using my spreadsheet program. So it's just going to launch LibreOffice, and there you go. This is the scan that I just run using Web UI. And here it is in a spreadsheet format that you can use for your management purposes. So this is, again, one cool feature. But another cool feature, because it's in database, you get a little search engine. So what is good about NETTACKER, you can actually use like your own mini Shodan for your internal network or for your penetration testing and bug bounty hunting, because you can actually do the searches here. You can see, because all the results are here. So for example, if I want to go and filter by a particular host, for example, remember we looked at something called OCMS, right? I find it straight away, right? And you can see all the descriptions here of what we discovered. We saw that it was running Cloudflare, it was, had port 443 and 80 open. So this is like the full report for it, right? And again, if I want to get this data in JSON and CSV, I can. Okay, another thing, you can, for example, search for something in description. For example, I want to find everything which had Nginx in it. I can just go and search for Nginx. You can see this is everything which was running Nginx again, and we can download it in different format. And you can see some previous scans I run in Uber. I will show you the Uber example in a minute as well. So this is what is very, very cool about NETTACKER. You get all your results in a database, and you get crawler, and you can go and very quickly find out what you are looking for, just using this built-in search engine. Okay, actually, let me see if I can find, do I have anything running PHP? There you go. Yeah, there was something which was running PHP, and you can see it instantly returned me the results. Okay, now let me show you something else, right? Of course, this was running Web UI, and you can see as it's running, it produces this access log because it's just using Flask, right? But you saw something interesting there, which I showed you, was about Uber. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples with Uber as well. Uber is an interesting example because it has hundreds and hundreds of subdomains. And again, a reminder that Uber has a bug bounty policy allowing security researchers to perform scans. So this is the only reason why I'm using them as an example. And a reminder to only use NETTACKER on the networks that you own or you have permission to scan. So let me show you how we can look at the subdomains run by Uber. This will take a little bit of time because they have hundreds of subdomains, but it's actually pretty interesting to see how many they've got. And this is how you can do it. You can just say, okay, I want to look at uber.com and I want to use subdomain scan module. Okay, so this is going to take a while because Uber has hundreds of subdomains. I will see how many exactly, but you will see that it will actually go at 401. There you go. You can see now, these are all the subdomains of Uber that we've now discovered. And you can see how quickly an attacker has actually discovered all the subdomains. Another cool thing that you can do now on all these 400 subdomains is so you can run any other module, right, like port scan or server version 1. For example, let's use server version 1. And we'll see what Uber is running on all the subdomains. Because this is going to take to be a little bit bigger scan, let me run it with, let's say, 100 threads, right? Let's see if that is going to speed this up a little bit. But again, you can experiment with a number of threads and number of hotspot thread yourself. But there you go. You can see now that NETTACKER is now scanning, doing effectively a port scan on port 80 and 443, and it's expecting to see the server version header being returned, and it is now showing it for every single subdomain of Uber. This is, again, very, very cool thing. Again, not many open source and free programs can do that. Again, we're now scanning an organization which contains 400 subdomains, and you can see how quickly it scanned it and returned us all the open ports on port 80 and 443, and what was leaking inside the server header. Okay. Once it's finished, we can have a look at the graph, of course, but this is not why I used Uber to show you. I wanted to showcase you two other modules that NETTACKER has, because I know that Uber is using WordPress. Okay, and there are a couple of WordPress modules existing in NETTACKER that I want to demonstrate to you. And they are a user enumeration module, and they are a plugin enumeration module. I'm not sure how many of you use, for example, WP Scan to scan WordPress. Of course, WordPress is one of the world's most popular content management system, but it is also quite vulnerable if you misconfigure it. And of course, another big problem about WordPress is that main vulnerabilities happen in plugins. And of course, whenever there is a vulnerability in WordPress plugin, there is a CVE, there's big announcement. So what NETTACKER allows you to do, it has a dictionary of known WordPress plugins which had a vulnerability at some point in the past. And you can actually run NETTACKER. You can combine, as you can see here, the server version scanning. You can combine port scanning, but you can also combine it with WordPress scanning as well, or you can just use the WordPress module all by itself. Okay, so you can see scan is now finished. We can see how many modules were there. For example, we can see that this blog API was actually running Nginx. Which is quite interesting. The reason why NETTACKER is pausing right now, because it is trying to build this massive graph inside the HTML page, because I didn't ask it to do a CSV, I asked it to generate an HTML page. Of course, that is going to take a while because it needs to draw this massive graph of all the subdomains, and that will take a while. So I'm actually not going to wait for it to finish. I will see if I can try to interrupt it, because I want to show you another module. There you go. You see it's done. See, this is all done. You can see all the 400 subdomains of Uber with all the information of what they're running on each subdomain. And again, with our nice free and open source OWASP tool, I want to show you two other modules which we have, because OWASP.org doesn't run WordPress, but I know that Uber does. So Uber has this host called eng.uber.com, which has WordPress. So I want to see if this particular host is running any vulnerable WordPress plugins. Well, not vulnerable now, because that would be illegal. These are the plugins which were vulnerable in the past. So I'm going to use WordPress plugin scan module. So that is now going to run this host through a dictionary of all the known WordPress plugins which had vulnerability before. And I think there are several hundreds of them. And there you go, it found one hit. You can see there is a table press plugin which is used on this particular host, which is very, very cool. As you can see how quickly this was discovered this. But then there is another thing that I want to try. I want to try a WordPress user enum module. So WordPress user enum module will try to see if this particular WordPress on this host is misconfigured and it is leaking the usernames of people who use this WordPress instance. Okay, so why is it useful? It can be useful because once you know the username, all you need to guess is now a password, right? So let's now run it on this target. Oh, it's user enum scan. Yeah, I forgot to add the magic word because it's a scan, brute, or vuln. And there you go, see how many users an attacker discovered. So these are all the users which are registered on this WordPress instance. You can see their names. Yeah, you can see there's Uber technical program management team, right? And lots of people's names, safety engineering, right? So we can see all the people's name, but you can see here this is a username. So AA Kriti, right? And now I know it's a valid username. And of course, it is useful to a bug bounty hunter or to an attacker, or if you are an internal engineer responsible for security at Uber, probably you want to harden your instance to make sure that it doesn't actually leak your the usernames of the users. But that is an example of how it can be done. And again, because the result was produced in HTML, if I want to take a look at this using a nice HTML format, I can just go and copy that and open it in Firefox inside my web browser, and I can see the results in a nice HTML format, just like this. Yeah, there you go. You can see all the user details are here, and you can see that these are all the users which were discussed, which were discovered by NETTACKER. You can see with all their names here. For example, you can see this is the Uber Technical Program Management and Learning Team, and here they are in the nice tabular format. And again, we'll say, oh, we forgot to use the CSV tab to download it, but lo and behold, I'm going to show you how to run Uber in Docker as well. So you don't have to install it and you can still get access to this data. So how do we run Uber in Docker? All I have to do is just have to say Docker compose, compose up. That's it. So I have to use it with a sudo, sorry, because it requires a administrator permissions. Okay, and now it's going to run in Docker. You can see it says running on 000 port 5000. Okay, so I can now just use a web browser to navigate to the same place, to 1270. I need to get as you can see, the API key is now different. Let me just switch back to my API key because that's what I need to log in. Okay, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to switch back to the browser. Oh, I've done it wrong place. I'm searching for a API key instead of connecting to the NETTACKER localhost. 127001 running 5000. Yeah, that's what I want to see. Okay, so let's see if it manages to connect. For some reason, it's looking at google.com. I don't want to. Let's try again. Okay, let's try to connect again. Ah, maybe it's not gonna like. Is it running? Yep. No, let me just relaunch Firefox. I think it is doesn't want to connect. And that is a bit of a live demo issue, but yeah, let me see if it's actually running again. Try to restart it. Yeah, but that's basically the same the way how you can run it in Docker once it works. I think I'm running out of memory on my VM. That's probably it's not starting up, but let me just try this again. Because the Firefox is taking a long time to start, I can tell that probably it's running out of memory. I think there's a problem with my Docker network, right? Okay, well, I'm going to abandon it. I'll show it to you. Let me see if I can show it to you using a Docker running on a different host. I'll return to Docker in a minute. I will want to show you some other modules before the end of this presentation. Let's talk about the databases first. So NETTACKER runs SQLite by default, but it can also run using MySQL or Postgres databases, which again, useful if you're running it inside your enterprise. And to configure it to run with MySQL or Postgres, you need to change its configuration. How to change it? It is actually available on the wiki. So you need to go to the NETTACKER GitHub page, navigate to wiki, and then look at the database usage. Another important thing is Maltego. Again, Maltego is a tool which is used for a lot of investigations. It's included in Kali Linux, and NETTACKER actually provides some transforms. So once you load NETTACKER transforms into Maltego, inside your Maltego UI, you will get this little NETTACKER transforms on the right-hand side. And if you want to perform scans using the NETTACKER transforms, for example, here in this screenshot, you can see that I'm right-clicking at OWASP.org, and all the NETTACKER transforms are here. So this is what happens if you choose familiar to us already the subdomain scan. So it will show you like this in the graph. And of course, you can then use it for further investigation. Another module I want to talk to you about is a very important one, and that is a module for Microsoft Exchange Server 0-day, which was affecting almost everyone earlier this year in March. Remember, there was an attack attributed to a Chinese group called Hafnium, and basically a lot of organizations which had their web outlook exposed to the internet, had the Exchange Server exposed, were actually affected by this vulnerability. And we were one of the first people to respond in for a free and open source tool. And you can see I tweeted here on March 17th that our free and open source OWASP Nettacker tool now has a module to scan your networks and detect the critical Microsoft Exchange CVE 2021-26855 vulnerability. I blogged about this, and you can read about this in my blog article. But basically, in NETTACKER now there is a module called MS Exchange CVE 2021-26855 vuln, and you can use it to scan your network or any network to see if you have a Microsoft Exchange server with this vulnerability. That is very important. Again, I actually received thanks from a small European country Center for Internet Security. They replied to me. They said that they actually used OWASP Nettacker to scan their entire country IP address ranges to discover vulnerable exchange service, and it helped that country's government to contact the companies which were affected by the CVE and get them to apply the patch. So that's why I think we were quite cool in this particular cybersecurity incident. There was another incident a year before in 2020 with Citrix vulnerability. And again, as you can see, I tweeted and posted a blog article about the Citrix CVE 2019-19781, which did the same thing. And basically, you can use NETTACKER with Citrix CVE module. And again, if you run it on the target, this is what NETTACKER does. It says, yep, I detected Citrix appliance and whether the target is vulnerable. And again, you can use it to scan all your network for vulnerable Citrix devices using it. So what are some use cases of OWASP Nettacker? Apart from the fact that you can use it for your penetration testing or in your bug bounty engagement, Nettacker is very useful tool for your network security as an organization. Why? Because you can use it for asset discovery. So you can scan your network or networks for open ports. You can scan your network for new hosts. You can scan your network for default credentials like admin. I'm actually going to show you how to do this. You can scan your whole network for a specific vulnerability. For example, like I show you MS Exchange CVE. You can monitor subdomains and open ports on them. As you have seen, we monitored subdomains of owasp.org and uber.com in this webinar. You can also discover expired SSL certificates in your IP ranges and in your networks, which is also very useful because you can find out which hosts, which service are probably abandoned by your IT team, because if someone forgot to renew SSL certificate, probably they've forgot to patch it as well. And you can, of course, find subdomains which host vulnerable versions of WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla. So before I finish this presentation, I want to show you another useful NETTACKER module, and that is brute forcing. Let me show you how you can perform brute forcing. So in NETTACKER, there are several brute forcing modules available. There's, of course, as you have seen, there's SSH, Telnet, SMTP, HTTP forms. I'm going to show you how to use an SSH brute module for SSH brute forcing. So I'm going to try to scan, sorry, this is a module, not the target. I'm going to scan a target, which is my local network, 192.168.132. Yep, 132.0/24. So that's 255 addresses, 256 addresses. And I want to see, is there any device on my network which will reply to admin as a username and admin as a password. Before I do that, I need to talk to you about how this works in terms of brute forcing. If I don't define username and password, NETTACKER will use its built-in dictionary for usernames and passwords. And you can combine them in different ways. So for example, if I only want to use the password dictionary, I will just say, okay, I want to try username admin, but for passwords, try all the dictionary which is built in, or you can define an external file. If I say a lowercase and I define the password like that, it will take it from the command line. If I use the uppercase P, I will then need to use an external dictionary, and that will be something like that, admin passwords.txt, for example, if I have all the possible passwords in this file. Okay, same thing with username. If I change the lowercase u to an uppercase U, and this will be my usernames.txt. So this is a dictionary containing all the usernames. Again, why is this useful? Because you might have several devices on your network which have specific default credentials, and there could be several of them, and if you want to test for all of them. Of course, brute forcing takes longer time. That's why I'm going to show you just with admin, because I suspect there is a network, there's a device somewhere on the network which might have admin. To speed this up, I will try to run this with, let's say, 100 threads using M. Oops, I forgot to define my NETTACKER in here. So of course I'm running not Python, I'm running NETTACKER.py. And again, so this is the target network. So that's 256 hosts. That's the brute forcing module. This is the combination of usernames and password I want to use. And to speed things up, I'm going to launch 100 threads. As you can see now, NETTACKER is going now to try to connect to 256 networks on my local network and try to log into every single one of them using admin and admin as a username and password. So you can see it's now reaching 220. It's almost finished. You can see it just took it a few seconds to complete. There you go, and it's done. And it's found the device. As you can see, I have this device on my network. Out of 256 devices, it found the one which has vulnerability. And you can see it managed to brute force and log in successfully to this device using admin and admin. So that is how you would use a brute forcing module. Okay, now I think I'm almost at the end of my presentation. I know something happened with Docker, but I can assure you it works. I think this is just a problem with my Docker configuration in the VM, because I use it for a different demo and I think I broke it. Some of the commands that you can use NETTACKER with, for example, if you want to find all subdomains, so grab server banners x powered by, you can use them like this. So this is just an overview of what we did today. You can find web services and what is running using port scan, server version vuln, x powered by vuln. There's also another cool module called WAPalizer scan. Again, this is useful to discover what is running. I haven't showed it to you, but I will find it and just show it to you in 1 second. So again, another useful module. So let's try and run it. So if I now use my NETTACKER again, and I use it on OWASP.org, and I want to use module WAPalizer scan. Okay, let's try running it on just one OWASP.org by itself. There you go. Straight away, it returned me everything which was on OWASP.org. It discovered that there's a Google Analytics engine on it. It's running jQuery. It's running Ruby on Rails. It has Varnish cache. It's using Cloudflare, GitHub Pages, and Fastly. And there you go. You can see how quickly discovered. Now I want to run the same module on all the subdomains of OWASP.org. I just add -s. You can see it's now going to do the same thing, going to go and discover every single subdomain of OWASP, and it's going to run WAPalizer on all of them. You can see it's already finding Amazon Cloudflare, another analytics pages, and it's going through all the subdomains for every single of OWASP.org subdomain. So this is a very useful module, again, for your information gathering tasks. And again, if you are not using it for pen testing or bug bounty hunting, if you're using it just inside your organization, inside your company, just to discover what you run, not just open ports and web server versions, but also frameworks. And you can see there's some programming languages that you can see, which are discovered by WAPalizer. Of course, the cool thing is that you can run it on all the subdomains. You can also run it on your networks just using the IP ranges, as I showed you before. And again, if you have several several IP ranges or several subdomains which belong to you, you can just create a text file and then you load your targets from the text file. Okay, I think this is almost it. I'm going to talk to you about the contributions. So basically, if you want to contribute to NETTACKER, do check the developer wiki, which we have on the documentation page, and just read and follow the contributor guidelines. And I think this is it for today. Thank you very much for watching this talk. You can contact me via email if you have any questions. And of course, I'll try to answer some questions now. But if you remember something that you want to ask me later, you can always email me using sam.stepanyan@owasp.org, or you can connect with me on Twitter. And my account on Twitter is SecureStep9. Thank you very much. And now I'm ready to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Sam. And it was such an informative session. Really nice. We have few questions in the chat box. So if you want to take them first, and then we can head on to the next set of questions.
Okay. So question number one, any difference between NETTACKER using Python 2 and 3? So there will be, because obviously in the current version, you might find that Python 2 version is a little bit more stable. But generally, I think if you're running multi-threaded NETTACKER, you will find that Python 3 is a little bit faster. Again, we are now decommissioning Python 3, so the next version of NETTACKER, version 003, is not going to support Python 2 anymore. But just in case, if you want to run it on an older device, which only supports Python 2, this is very, very useful. So that's the question on the difference between of Python 2 and Python 3. Yeah, so the next question is, as we know, when we're doing our penetration testing, sometimes it's controlled by a firewall or load balancer between our targets. Is there any mechanism to deal with this? Yes, so you can use it via a SOX proxy, and you can also detect if there is a, for example, Web Application Firewall, because there is a WAF detection module available inside NETTACKER. Next question. Thank you, Sam. Very useful tools. Thank you. How often is signature database, for example, WordPress, Joomla, other apps is updated? Is the same signature like WP-Scan, JoomScan, Joomla VS, and other databases? Okay, so this is a question that a lot of people ask. Actually, at the moment, the database is not updated very often, unfortunately, simply because it's an open source project and we don't have enough contributors to update this. With the next version of NETTACKER, we will try to improve this, because we will be able to import some of the signatures from other tools and release more frequent releases. At the moment, it's not. However, because it is absolutely open, for example, you can take the signatures or dictionary from any other tool, just use it as a text file, and use it with NETTACKER, and you utilize the NETTACKER's power in terms of combining it with subdomain scans, for example, or port scans to use with NETTACKER, even though the database can be a little bit out of date. Again, it requires someone to actually constantly watch, for example, for vulnerable WordPress modules. I've done it several months ago, but nobody did it as well. So if someone can contribute and say, okay, there is a new vulnerability. For example, I know there was a WordPress file manager vulnerability recently, right? And if you want to add it to the dictionary, you can do it. And also, WordPress module inside NETTACKER has a hidden option. If you use it by default, it uses a small dictionary. So small dictionary is just the plugins which had a vulnerability in the past, but there is a large dictionary that you can enable, and if you enable it, it'll scan it for all known WordPress plugins. Again, why is it useful? Because you can find out what is actually running. Okay, the next question is, how effective is this tool for bug hunting? I would say that's quite effective, because I use it myself. So I use it for, especially I use it with the server version of vulnerability, with X powered by, and with some of the other vulnerabilities, Wapalizer, for example, to scan everything. As you have seen, for example, I can scan the whole domain, like uber.com or OWASP.org, and all the subdomains in one go, and get all the results very quickly. Because to do the same thing with other tools, which are of course available, you will have to chain them. And you have to chain them manually, and you need to understand how to feed results from one tool into another, which is quite problematic. NETTACKER can actually chain with several other modules. And for example, I use sometimes it with OWASP AMAS, which is another great tool for finding subdomains. And I would run OWASP AMAS first because it just finds more precisely the targets and the subdomains to create a text file as an output. And then I use that text file as a source for OWASP Nettacker, because it was a Nettacker can take any text file as an input. Okay. Next question, what features are coming in the next version? So the next version, we are completely rewriting it using Python 3, but we're also changing the ways how modules are written because they will be templated using YAML. Because at the moment, modules are written in Python. And if you look at the source code for modules, you'll find out that there's a lot of copy-paste code, which is, of course, not good. But again, remember that Nettacker was originally created for students. And I think as a tool created for students, it's amazing if you use it. Once you start looking into the code, you'll say, yeah, there is a lot of space for improvement, and it is being improved. So the main feature coming, it will be a YAML module. Because of the YAML, we will also import the vulnerabilities from other open source tools, so you can have more modules released more frequently, which I think is great. There's also a new and improved web user interface coming. Web UI is going to be looking much, much nicer than it is right now. Is there possible GUI version in coming features like OWASP ZAP? Yeah, so yeah, that requires a little bit of work. I don't think we have that much of a rich UI for it. And again, great advantage of Nettacker is that you can automate it in running in CLI tool, and all you need to have is Python or Docker. Right. Of course, ZAP can also be automated. ZAP has a very, very rich UI, and you can do a lot of investigation. We are trying to do this, and again, hopefully the next version of UI is going to be much, much better. I think at the moment the main advantage of the current UI is the fact that it's like Google search, so you can use it as a showdown search. But in the new version, we are working on replacing the database. Once we replace it with Elastic, it will be a little bit closer to tools like Census and Shodan rather than ZAP. But of course, it would be nice to have a nicer UI, but again, that requires people to actually work on it and code it. Okay, a good question. How to block Nettacker scanning on our service? Are there any special headers that are used by Nettacker so we can add the pattern on our WAF? Very good question, right? At the moment, you can't detect Nettacker at all because it is actually does not have a header by default. It is using an evasion mechanism. So it actually uses a random user agents in its header to avoid exactly what you detected. So yeah, it's the only way to stop Nettacker from or any similar tools which use user agent masquerading is to implement a feature on your web application firewall, which will do a JavaScript challenge or cookie-based challenge. So Nettacker currently does not follow cookies. It does not have an engine like Phantom.js, for example. It just issues requests using standard Python request library. But to avoid blocking that you described based on user agent is using a random user agents, which are also loaded from the dictionary that you can load any combination of. So yeah, on the WAF, the best thing to do is to enable your JavaScript challenge or captcha. Again, for example, if using Cloudflare WAF, you can do it very easily by just enabling the JavaScript challenge. That will stop Nettacker from further scans. Okay, any further questions? I think that was the last one, but I'm happy to answer any more.
Yeah. Anybody else with any questions? We can probably take it, or else Sam would be getting a lot of DMs and emails for queries and questions.
I can see how popular this talk was. But again, Nettacker is very, very cool tool. This is why I fell in love with it. I became a co-leader for it, and I invited more students. And we're currently running a program for students. It's it's something which I think OWASP was actually missing for a while, even though OWASP is mainly for application security. NETTACKER is a more of a scanner tool. You can call it for network security, infrastructure security. There are application security modules, of course, there. And of course, you can scan it for the open web service, and WebAlyzer tool is very useful. But I think the most important feature of it for organizations is the asset inventory, that you can scan your own network and you can have a database of everything that you have on your network with just one simple command line tool, or you can run it in Docker, or you can run it in Web UI. You can also put it on in a cron job and run it as a scheduled job and keep, for example, producing JSON reports or CSV reports, and then run a diff between them so you can see if there's anything new on your network that you didn't know about. So there are a lot of interesting and cool features that you can use it in your network. And of course, for bug bounty and pen testing purposes, it's also quite useful. And I think going back to the bug bounty question that I saw from someone, I will tell you my bug bounty tip, especially for you, everyone watching on OWASP Jakarta. I use the SSL certificate expired vuln a lot for my own bug bounty hunting, because that allows me to find servers which are abandoned. And usually when you then discover that server, you can then go and dig further and find something else. For example, I would run the directory scan on it, or admin scan, which will perform like directory busting attack on the server, and we'll always find something interesting, like an abandoned backup file, for example, containing usernames and passwords. And you wouldn't believe, actually, I have discovered several servers in bug bounty which had a default username and password for some of the servers, some of the applications. And yeah, you can just load them up into the brute forcing module. Okay, any further questions? Everyone's happy? Of course, you can just go and download it from GitHub, just do a git clone. All the download instructions are available. If you have some problems with it, again, there are some issues running it on Windows. Also, if you hit any issues running it with Python 3.9, you can try to downgrade to Python 3.7. If you want to install it in Kali Linux, I have actually recorded a video on how to install NETTACKER in Kali Linux, and it is available on my YouTube channel. So you can just search YouTube for NETTACKER Kali Linux and you will find it.
Great. Thanks for all the resources, Sam. And on that note, we'll just close down this session today. And I again thank you on behalf of OWASP Jakarta for this amazing session today. And thanks to the amazing audience. So everyone, thank you so much. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.